Redditors who went to school with adult film stars, what were they like? Welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. I went to high school with a girl named Kelly Wells. She was a couple of grades ahead of me and lived just a few blocks down the street. Coming from a small town, everyone at school at least recognized each other, though she didn't stand out much. She was really quiet and unassuming. I don't remember her having a lot of friends or dating anyone. A few years after I graduated, my sister mentioned that Kelly had gone on to work in the adult entertainment industry under the name Kelly Wells. I was skeptical, so she suggested I look it up, and sure enough, it was her. She had changed her look quite a bit, going blonde and wearing heavy makeup. It was surprising since I never would have guessed that back in high school. I heard that she moved to Las Vegas after graduation, started working as a dancer, and eventually got into films. Her younger sister would get really upset whenever anyone brought it up. Story 2. I went to high school with Brie Olson. She was a couple of years younger than me, so we didn't interact much. I'd just pass her in the halls. My younger brother was in her grade though, and one of his friends would brag that he had hooked up with her after she became famous. There were always rumors circulating about her back then. One was about a friend walking in on her, another was that she'd come out as a lesbian. In our small conservative farm town, that one was especially surprising. I worked at the local grocery store around that time and would sometimes see her dad come in. He always seemed down, and I remember wondering if it had to do with the rumors. I saw her in the store a couple of times, but, honestly, back then I didn't think much of it. My brother's friend still has her number and says she'll text him whenever she's back in the nearby city, which is about 20 minutes from our town. She visits a GM club there and lets him know when she's around. I went once with them, but to me it just felt like, what's the big deal? It's just Rachel. She sat with us and we just chatted. Nothing wild. Story 3. I've shared this before, but I went to high school with Missy Stone. She lived on the same street as my girlfriend at the time and was a freshman when I was a senior. She was really nice. Every time we saw each other after my girlfriend introduced us, she'd always wave and say hi. If we passed each other in the halls, we'd chat a bit on the way to class, and sometimes she'd give me a hug. She always seemed cheerful and friendly. Years later, my ex sent me a link to a site and insisted I check it out, and it blew my mind to see her there. I heard she returned to our hometown a few years later and got a job as a server at a local restaurant. I saw her once from a distance, but she didn't see me. Friends mentioned they'd run into her and brought up her past career. It was a little unfortunate. She was probably hoping to leave that part of her life behind, but in a small town like ours, people remember and don't hesitate to remind others of it. Story 4. I went to high school with Sasha Gray. She was very quiet, a great student, and always polite. She kind of kept to herself and was one of those people that no one really interacted with much. It was pretty surprising when she later entered the adult film industry. Story 5. I went to high school with someone who later went by Taylor Thomas, her screen name. In school, she was just a regular I love horses type, a total country girl. After high school, she went to the community college nearby, then started working as a dancer, and eventually got into the adult entertainment industry. I don't think her career in that field lasted too long though. The last I heard, she was back in town working at Dairy Queen, but that was about 3 years ago. Story 6. This wasn't from high school, but I used to work for a big American consumer electronics retailer. I had a supervisor who was your typical gym guy, always wearing Ed Hardy or Affliction t-shirts, hitting the clubs every night, partying hard, and bragging about his success with women. He'd often ask how many girls I hooked up with over the weekend, and then make fun of me when I said none. Anyway, he got fired, but a few weeks later, he came back to pick up his paycheck. One of his close friends still worked there, so they were chatting. After he left, I went over to talk to his friend and asked what he'd been up to since getting fired. His friend said, "Oh, he's got a modeling job now. They fly him out to California for the weekend, and he's making a lot of money." I was surprised, but honestly, I didn't think much about it because I couldn't stand this guy. Weeks later, his friend finally told me in confidence that he was actually doing guys' adult films. He pulled it up on his phone and there was my old boss. Story 7. I went to high school with Dana Dearmond, which is actually her real name. She was nice and pretty smart. I remember her mentioning once that she wanted to become a dancer, and she dated one of my friends for a while. We were friendly in class, though we didn't really hang out outside of school. That's about all I remember of her. Story 8. I didn't go to high school with Ron Jeremy, but I did graduate from the same school. My aunt actually went there at the same time and graduated in the same year as him. She remembers him as a quiet guy and mostly recalls that he played the piano, there's a good pianist joke in there somewhere. When I was a student, we looked him up in one of the old yearbooks. He looked pretty much the same, just a lot thinner. Story 9. I went to school with and am now friends with a gay adult film star. During high school, he was a pretty typical jock, quite the homophobic tough guy for all 4 years. But after graduation, he came out and ended up becoming one of the most popular figures in the adult industry. Honestly, back then, I never would have guessed he was gay. His name is Connor Klein, or maybe Klein. I should add that he's now one of the coolest, most generous people I know. One time, a group of about 15 of us went go-karting, and it ended up being $120 each. He paid for everyone without saying a word. That's just one example of how chill he's become. Story 10. I went to high school with Faye Reagan. She was a year ahead of me, so we didn't interact much. From what I remember, she was pretty normal, nice, though she had a bit of a resting bee face, which made her seem aloof. I don't recall hearing any rumors about her being promiscuous either. Story 11. I went to high school with someone who later became a Playboy playmate, though I can't remember her stage name. We were friends on Facebook for a while, and it was honestly a bit sad to see. By then, she was 26, and it seemed clear that Playboy hadn't really launched her into stardom. I had a big crush on her in high school. She was quiet, adorable, and had a laid-back, skater style. Fast forward 8 years, and she was clearly struggling with the pressures of maintaining a certain image, trying to make the club scene look enjoyable. Story 12. I went to high school with someone who later became well known in the adult film industry, though I'm not sure it's appropriate to use her real name, so I won't. She was more or less a friend, or at least we ran in the same social circles. She was a very kind person, couldn't say anything bad about her. She was always welcoming and warm-hearted, never stuck up. She was definitely considered attractive and dated a few of my friends, though, like most high school relationships, they didn't last. One day, a friend of mine, let's call him Stevenson, told us he heard that she had become an adult film star. At first, we didn't believe him, but he explained how he came to learn this news and mentioned she was in a few films. This made us curious, and after some searching, we eventually found one of the films, bought it, and ended up watching it at a party later that week with everyone gathered around. Story 13. I went to middle school with Kia Tropic and junior college with Naomi Cruz. Kia was definitely someone who grew into herself over time. In middle school, she was a quiet, nerdy girl who didn't wear makeup and had big glasses. She was pretty cool though, and we ended up going to different high schools. I saw her again at a party in college after she entered the adult industry, and she had really changed. The last I heard, she was working at a major coffee chain after leaving the business. Naomi, on the other hand, was very open about her career in adult films. She wasn't shy about flashing people or talking about her relationships, including one with an older man that seemed to be for financial reasons. She also made some flirtatious moves toward our instructors in class. After leaving the industry, she made a complete change. She had kids, got married, and moved across the country. I sometimes wonder if she ever told her husband about her past. Story 14. I went to high school with Danny Woodward. She was a grade below me. I had a few classes with her, and she was just your typical popular high school girl. I wasn't very popular and tended to keep to myself, but in the few times I interacted with her, she was always really nice. I didn't know she was involved in adult films until a few years later when she won an AVN award, and it spread around MySpace of all places. Story 15. I went to high school with Remy LaCroix. We were friends through a sport we both played, and she was incredibly nice and cool. She used to work at a well-known grocery store across from my parents' house, and we'd hang out during her lunch break. After high school, we lost touch, and she deactivated her Facebook. Eventually, someone from high school posted online suggesting we Google her name, and sure enough, it was her. To answer some questions I know will come up. Yes, she was incredibly attractive back then, and no, I didn't pursue anything beyond friendship. Story 16. I went to high school with Amber Swift, who briefly worked in the adult industry. I didn't really know her personally, but I knew some of her friends, who had a reputation for being more outgoing and adventurous, which was rare at my school. Her time in the industry was short-lived, and she didn't really fit the typical Hollywood beauty standard. I'll admit I checked out her videos and soloed on principle. Story 17. I went to high school with a girl who later became a well-known adult film star, Dakota Skye. Back then, she had a lot of challenges. She wasn't exactly out of control, but had some significant family struggles, living with her aunt and uncle. She was pretty down-to-earth, but you could tell she was trying to make ends meet. To be honest, I figured she would end up doing something in a similar field, but I didn't know if it would be adult films, stripping, or something else. What surprised me the most, though, was how quickly she became successful. When I first heard she was in the adult industry, I didn't think she'd get far. To me, she never really stood out as attractive, but then I started seeing her videos pop up everywhere. Even now, I still don't find her appealing. It's not about jealousy, it's just that she never really caught my interest. She was always someone I found difficult to connect with, so it's strange to see her gain popularity in that way. Story 18. My ex-girlfriend went to school with Tori Black back in the day. She mentioned that Tori was just a regular girl who played soccer and did all the typical activities. It's a bit strange to think about how someone who seemed so normal back then ended up in the adult film industry later on. It just goes to show it could happen to anyone. Story 19. I didn't go to the same school, but I attended a lot of the same parties as the Play with Jen girl. She wasn't particularly noticeable or outgoing, so I honestly didn't think much of her at the time. I had to be reminded of her name when it came out that she was in adult films. She was that forgettable. She claims that her ex released their private videos, and since they were already out there, she decided to make some money off of them. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's what she says. One of my awkward friends tried hitting on her by asking for her autograph once he found out about her career, and that's probably my favorite part of the whole story. Story 20. I know of a girl from a nearby all-girls school who was in my general social circle during high school. She was always seeking attention and had big dreams of becoming a famous actress, model, or singer. She loved to perform at school events and would sometimes burst into song, almost like something out of a movie scene. After high school, she moved to Los Angeles, hoping for big success, but things didn't work out as planned. Her family had money, so they supported her with a manager and other resources, but her career didn't take off. I remember when she released an album, she was practically giving away downloads, and after a week, only a handful were actually distributed. Eventually, she started doing more provocative modeling work, and over time, it led her down a different path in the entertainment industry. Regardless of the challenges, she found her way, and it seems like she's doing what works for her. Story 21. I didn't go to high school with her, but she always seemed like a genuinely nice person. We met through mutual friends in college. I think the first time I met her was at a Halloween party where she had an interesting costume as a football player. She was friendly, pretty, and just fun to be around. But then, out of nowhere, she disappeared from our social circle. No one really knew what happened to her. She stopped showing up to work and basically vanished from the city. A while later, she reappeared under the name Tiffany Tyler, and we were all really surprised. Some of the girls in our group said, "I saw that coming," but honestly, I didn't understand how they could have predicted it. As for Sandy Westgate, I did go to high school with her, though I didn't really know her well. I remember she always tried to maintain a more classy image, like something you'd see in Playboy, but I guess she needed more financial stability than that lifestyle could offer. Story 22. I went to school with someone who later became known as Bonnie Rotten, though that's not her real name, of course. She was a cheerleader, and to be honest, she wasn't the most likable person. She had a small group of friends who could be pretty unpleasant as well. I wasn't a fan of hers back then, but looking back now, things have certainly changed. Story 23. I not only went to school with but was good friends with Harmony Rose. We hung out in the same circle and were always hanging out with said circle getting messed up. Long story short, we knew she would be an adult film star. She knew it too. It was pretty much the running joke. She had a curvy body. She hooked up with everyone. She loved doing it. She was also extremely open about loving sex and numbers she did it with. Basically, it was a shoe-in and we all knew it. She was really nice and loved just hanging out with everyone, getting shit-faced off whatever powder or drink we had that day. Flirted with everyone and was really good at it too. After high school we all disbanded and went our separate ways for the most part, and sure enough about 10 years ago, I get a text from a friend saying, "Did you see Harmony's movie?" I was like, what? I then Googled her. There she was, in all her glory. She finally did it. We knew it wasn't a question of if, just when. She went on to become fairly well off for a while, heard she had a big house in Miami, and made tons of movies. She later left the biz to become a paramedic in like Virginia or something. Story 24. I was in a few courses with a girl who went by the name Penny Lane. In one of our classes, she gave a presentation about her career in the adult entertainment industry. She came in dressed professionally and talked about the ins and outs of her job. It was an interesting experience. She was very intelligent and attractive. I didn't know her well enough to form a deep opinion on her personality, but she definitely didn't fit the stereotypical image many people have of those in that field. Far from it, in fact. Story 25. A friend of mine dated a woman named Stoya when she lived in Philly. She was fine, Sometimes a bit attention-seeking, but overall she was decent. Eventually, she moved to LA with the intention of pursuing a career in the adult entertainment industry. The guy she was seeing at the time wasn't happy about it, but he went with her. They ended up breaking up soon after. Story 26. I went to high school with a girl who now goes by Jenna Ashley. She was in the grade below me and had a reputation for being a bit adventurous, which stood out in our small school. She was generally nice to me but could have a sharp side. She enjoyed partying a lot, and as far as I remember, school wasn't her main focus. As far as I know, she's doing well now. She's working with some major production companies and has gotten to a point where she proudly shares about her career on her regular Facebook page. I did hear from a friend that they had an encounter years ago, and they mentioned a detail about her that wasn't the most flattering. She also once made a pass at me, but I wasn't interested at the time. Story 27. I went to high school with Sophia Grace, and even back then, she had a very independent, I'll do what I want, when I want, not worried about anyone else's opinion attitude. It's clear she's carried that same philosophy into her adult life. She dealt with a lot of drama in high school, though I can't recall the specifics, and she continues to face criticism from some people in our hometown due to her career. Ironically, many of her critics are also fans of her work. Back in the day, she always had a positive energy, and from what I can tell through Facebook, she's still the same. Story 28. She was the typical popular, petite blonde, and I was one of the outsiders. I always thought she didn't like me, but one day she came into the ER where my dad worked with a cheerleading injury. She spent a good while talking to my dad, going on and on about how nice I was, how much she liked me, and how cute she thought I was. When my dad told me this, not knowing how I felt about her, I was honestly shocked. She turned out to be such a sweet person. Now, she's moved on from that phase of her life, and has a family with a husband and 2 wonderful kids. She's a great person. Story 29. I went to high school with a girl who ended up appearing in one of those casting couch-style videos. It wasn't a big deal, and I wouldn't have known about it if a classmate hadn't shared the link on Facebook. She was a nice person, not necessarily the most striking but definitely cute in a girl-next-door kind of way. She was really smart, got mostly A's and B's, and from what I knew, her home life seemed pretty stable. I was also on the wrestling team with her brother. The last I heard, a few years ago, she had a child, so I'm not sure if she's still involved in the industry. Story 30. Brittany and Whitney Stevens are 2 interesting sisters with a unique story. From what I recall, they were always a bit alternative even back in high school. There were a few other people from our school who ended up in the entertainment industry, but most were more known for their achievements in sports, like Cub Swanson and Timothy Bradley, who also went to school with the Stevens sisters. Story 31. I was a year ahead of Belle Knox in high school. We still keep in touch, and I want to emphasize that she's a really great person, but she was honestly the last person I would have expected to go into that line of work. She was a right-leaning, debate team kind of girl, nerdy, and probably one of the smartest in her graduating class. I remember judging a novice tournament during my sophomore year and watching her after one of her rounds. I thought, she's really smart, though not the most charismatic at that age. Who really is, right? It's fascinating to see how people evolve over the years. It does feel a bit strange, though, when you're casually browsing online a few years later and unexpectedly come across someone you went to high school with. Story 32. I went to school with Lizzie Tucker. While I didn't know her personally, I was familiar with her through various circumstances. In high school, she had a reputation that wasn't exactly flattering, and people would often joke about her lack of ambition. The kind of comments that were made were along the lines of she'd better marry rich or find a way to get by. I'm sure no one said that directly to her, but when she later pursued a career in a different field, it surprised a lot of people. The way people reacted was wild. For those of us who had her on social media, it was definitely intense. Her social circle was interesting, and she was often seen with people you wouldn't expect to be associated with that sort of lifestyle. By the time we were wrapping up senior year, things seemed to be falling apart for a lot of people, and this situation was kind of the final straw for some. People went as far as sending her parents photos, talking to her family about it, and even bragging about being involved with her. It got pretty out of hand. I'd also run into her at public events when she came back from the West Coast. Each time I thought she had left the industry, but then I'd find more videos of her online, and it was clear she hadn't stopped. Story 33. I went to high school with Corin Carter. Back in school, there were rumors about her being involved in a private video with a friend of my brother. After graduation, she moved to Florida and started working as a dancer. Eventually, she appeared in a few adult films. Honestly, it wasn't too surprising given the path she seemed to be on. Story 34. I went to school with Rylan Ray and we were on the track and field team together. I never really thought of her that way, but I do remember once seeing her get out of a car with two guys in a hotel parking lot. She seemed surprised to see me, and I kind of brushed it off at the time. Looking back, I realize I probably misunderstood the situation. Now, years later, I see that she's made a name for herself in a different industry, which I never would have guessed back then. Story 35. A friend of mine from college shared that he was homeschooled with Madison Ivy. He mentioned that Madison's younger brother was on a club swim team, and during practice hours, Madison would often show up in a bikini to sunbathe by the pool. She seemed to enjoy drawing attention to herself, which made an impression on the guys there. I don't know exactly when she entered the entertainment industry, but my friend recalled that her brother would often hear comments from others about her appearance. It was clear even back then that she had a strong presence. Story 36. I went to high school with Megan Salinas, and funny enough, her real name actually sounds more fitting for a stage name than the one she uses now. She was a really nice person though. In 2012, a group of friends and I rented a room for spring break in South Padre Island, and she happened to be there with one of my friends. She was really down to earth and approachable, not at all stuck up. We went to a party where I ended up taking some Molly and misplaced my headphones. I asked her about it and she told me they were outside, so she picked them up for me. After that, a few of us stayed up all night talking and just hanging out. She was a pretty cool person to chill with. Story 37. I went to school with Keisha Kane. We sat together in class and went out for drinks a few times. She was always really fun and outgoing back then, and she's still one of the most positive and happy people I know. I'm genuinely happy for all her success. Story 38. I knew a girl who gained some local recognition after high school for some professional photos and videos she did. From 1st to 7th grade, she was totally normal, smart, sweet, with a good family and a solid head on her shoulders. However, after February vacation in 2005, she seemed to have undergone a noticeable change, with a much fuller appearance, which some rumors suggested were due to a gift from her parents. I can't say for sure, but after that, her style and attitude changed dramatically, and she started dressing more provocatively. Things seemed to take a different turn from there. Story 39. I met my ex-girlfriend, Jackie Ash, when I was 12 years old, while volunteering for disabled services. My twin has spina bifida, and I believe her brother was autistic, so we connected through that shared experience. Jackie was extremely friendly, and we spent months talking on the phone. I would only see her in person during the summer when we were both volunteering. It wasn't until I was about 21 that I found out she had become known for her work in the adult industry. I still hope to reconnect with her one day. If anyone knows her, feel free to reach out. I can prove our connection by sharing details like the high school she attended, her brother's name, and her real name. Story 40. I went to college with a girl named Katie Jordan, her screen name. We lived on the same floor and hung out pretty regularly. I even ended up dating one of her roommates. Katie seemed like a pretty typical college student, a few months older than us, always ready to hang out and party. She actually took my favorite hat once. Still can't believe she did that, lol. But she had this thing where she'd go back home to Cleveland regularly to work at AGM Club. After a while, she disappeared from our circle, and we lost track of her. Then, years later, I stumbled upon an interview of hers on an adult site. Turns out, she had been working in the adult industry while we were living in the dorms. It was a bit of a surprise at the time. I'll see if I can find some old pictures. Although I'll probably need a scanner to dig them out. Story 41. I graduated with a really kind and sweet girl who ended up becoming an adult film star. Let's call her A. She was outgoing, friendly, had a contagious laugh, and an even more amazing smile. She definitely had a lot of attention from guys, and that was something she enjoyed. I was a good student in school and seemed to have a lot of potential. Unfortunately, she made one video in the adult industry and soon after tragically offed herself, the victim of relentless bullying and harassment from both her peers and people she considered friends. It was an incredibly sad event, and what upset me the most was how many people seemed to focus more on her career choice than the fact that she was struggling and lost her life. It was a heartbreaking situation. Story 42. I went to school with Faye Reagan. She was the first person to speak to me when I moved to the small town, though our conversation wasn't very long. She was shy and not really known for being promiscuous. One thing I'll always remember before she moved away to pursue her career is that she was always taking photos with a friend of hers. Nothing too wild, but it was back in the MySpace days when I knew her. She was a really attractive redhead, and despite what some people might think, she wasn't one of the more outgoing girls in town. I still occasionally see her around, usually at Walmart during the holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas. She seems to have changed a bit since then, but I still look back and remember having a huge crush on her in high school. Story 43. I went to high school with Larkin Love. Back then, she didn't have the same look she does now. She wasn't shy, but she wasn't overly attention-seeking either. She was really smart and a talented writer. I remember her reading a short story to a small audience, and it left an impression on me. There were some rumors going around in high school about her family, including one about her parents being inappropriate and other allegations. I always assumed they were just mean gossip aimed at someone who was a bit different from the rest of us. Years later, I heard from a friend that she was working in the adult film industry. I looked it up and sure enough, she had made a name for herself in that field. Looking back, I can't be sure if the rumors were true, but I do feel bad if they were. Everyone's life takes its own path, and hers just happened to lead her in a different direction. Story 44. This might not get much attention, but I went to high school with someone named Veronique Vega, a pseudonym. I mostly knew her from working on the school newspaper, where she was the photography editor, which I thought was an interesting choice. We would chat occasionally, and she'd tell me how much she admired Nicole Richie and Paris Hilton. She was friendly, though not really someone I connected with on a personal level. A year or two after graduation, a friend of mine mentioned that she had entered the adult film industry. She looks pretty much the same as she did back in high school. Story 45. I sat next to Brianna Banks in junior high and high school. Back in junior high, I had a huge crush on her. She was so sweet. But by 10th and 11th grade, she started spending time with some troubled people and dealing with personal issues at home. Eventually, she ended up couch surfing and getting involved in relationships that weren't the best for her. I didn't hear much from her after that, until a couple of years post-graduation when I worked with a guy who was dating her. One day, he came in and said, "I just found out my girlfriend is doing adult films." Unsurprisingly, they broke up, though they still occasionally connected. Story 46. I went to high school with Natasha White, and my cousin is good friends with her. I knew Natasha because I was friends with her boyfriend at the time. They were both really into partying and seemed happy together. She was quiet and didn't really care much about school. She even came over to my grandma's house to visit my cousin. We graduated in 2012, and about a year later, it became known that she was involved in adult entertainment. I felt bad for her ex. Everyone said he was really depressed after their breakup. He truly loved her, and I can't imagine how he must feel knowing someone he loved is now a well-known adult film star. Story 47. I went to high school with Rylan Ray, formerly known as Vivian Vista. She's been in the public eye quite a bit, and it seems like she's gaining recognition fast, even winning a few awards in her field. I played on the volleyball team with her, and she was very outgoing. She made an effort to fit in and be popular, but in our small town, that wasn't too hard. She got most, if not all, of her tattoos during her junior and senior years, and her first project came out, I think, during her senior year. I had moved away by then, but one day I got a call from my ex telling me to look up Vivian Vista. I did, and there she was, with a completely different career path than I had imagined. Story 48. I didn't go to school with her, but my high school and the rival high school had some shared classes since they were only about 4 minutes apart. Jillian Jansen, now known as Brooks, went to the rival school. From what I heard, she started doing online shows as soon as she turned 18 and later moved to Vine, before they had strict content rules. Her friends ended up sharing her Vine content across both schools. Shortly after that, she moved to California and pursued a career in adult entertainment. Story 49. I went to high school with Jesse Rogers. There was a group of about 7 Brazilian students who stuck together as a tight-knit group. They kept to themselves, mostly speaking Portuguese outside of class. Jessie wasn't very noticeable in high school. She wasn't considered conventionally attractive and didn't wear revealing clothes. She mostly blended into the background. Story 50. I went to high school with Tori Black. She was a couple of grades ahead of me and ended up going to a boarding or Christian school towards the end of her high school years, as her parents made that decision. I do remember some rumors circulating about her being similar to how she appeared in certain videos. We lived in a small town, so rumors tend to get blown out of proportion in high school, but from the few conversations I had with her, she didn't seem like what people described. It wasn't a huge shock when we eventually found out, and I even remember helping share access to certain accounts with people so they could see it for themselves. Story 51. I didn't go to high school with her exactly, but Juliet Black, her stage name, attended a high school in the same area as me. I met her when she worked at the local music shop, and we dated for a while in high school. We had typical high school dates, like going to the coffee shop, hanging out at Denny's, and watching movies. One time, she invited me to a party, but I wasn't really interested in going. I think it hurt her feelings that I didn't show up, and she ended up drinking a lot that night, which led to a situation where they had to call someone's parents for help. Later, I broke up with her, partly because of that and partly because I was a high school kid with a short attention span, but we stayed friends. Over time, we hung out a couple of times, and she started hanging out with a different group. There was a short period when I wanted to experiment with drugs, and she helped me get some a few times. We lost touch for a few years, and I eventually heard from a friend that she had started working in adult entertainment, which turned out to be true. We grabbed a beer once more recently while she was still in that industry, and she seemed fine, though it was a bit awkward. We haven't really talked since. She once posted on Facebook looking for a place to stay, and I offered mine, but she didn't take me up on it. I think she's out of the industry now and works as a bartender. Story 52. I went to school and used to hang out with Teal Conrad, her screen name, and she was always pretty cute and popular growing up, though she had a quirky side. We were good friends for a while, but I'll never forget when she showed me her camera and there were pictures of her and her friends doing some very unusual things. She was also known for bringing wild outfits to parties, like overalls or a Playboy bunny costume, especially when she had a few drinks. Near her senior year of high school, she started doing some modeling, and soon after, she had some photos of herself online for a modeling agency. Within a few months, she moved to Hollywood and transitioned into a different career path. I've hung out with her a few times at her new place, and we still keep in touch when we're in the same area. She's done well for herself, and she's happy with where she's at. Good for her. Story 53. I went to high school with Paris Hilton when she was in 9th grade, and I was a senior, at a small private school that never really made headlines. She wasn't the nicest person, and I made sure to let her know. Some people were impressed by her wealth, but most of us saw her as a bit of an airhead. We were in a school musical together, and she didn't put much effort into her performance. She seemed to think it was cool, but honestly, it just made her look out of place. She would bring little white mice, which she colored pink with a highlighter, to class and had noticeable cosmetic work done. She was the most cruel person I had encountered up until that point, often bullying a less attractive but really talented singer. I even publicly stepped in and told her to stop, or there would be consequences. When she started becoming famous, I was honestly shocked, but eventually, I just stopped paying attention to her, as I think most people did. Story 54. Most of the people posting in this thread aren't talking about established adult film stars, but rather individuals who performed in the adult industry. Just because someone performs in adult films doesn't automatically make them a star. For example, Kelly Wells and Sasha Grey are well-known figures in the industry and have had successful careers, so they are considered true adult film stars. In contrast, the majority of people who perform in adult films use more generic stage names to keep their identities private. They may do a few photoshoots or videos, earn some money, and then move on. This represents about 95 to 97% of people who work in the industry. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.